Right, so fresh off the back of his draw with Andy Ruiz Jr. in August this year, Jarrell Big Baby Miller has confirmed in an interview this week that he is in talks to fight Derek Chisora this coming January. The heavyweight clash is apparently scheduled to take place in Manchester, and as of right now, I honestly don't know what promotion this show is going to be on. I mean, Miller's last two fights have both took place on Riyadh season cards, and despite Derek Chisora not yet boxing on a Riyadh season card, he is often in attendance, which would lead you to believe that this fight could take place on a Riyadh season card. But as of right now, despite somewhat being in the loop, I can honestly tell you guys, I don't know. What I do know though is that this one has all the makings to be a classic heavyweight slugfest, and I for one am very much here for it. Both men have shown that they are willing to stand and trade heavy shots. Both men have shown great chins in their careers, and both men, I would say, are coming off the back of career best performances. And that really does say something, doesn't it, about how unconventional the career paths of these two fighters have been, because Derek Chisora is coming off the back of a win against Joe Joyce, who has now lost 3 out of his last 4 fights, and Jarrell Big Baby Miller is coming off the back of a draw against Andy Ruiz, a draw which comes off the back of a fight that he lost against Daniel Dubois. So it may beg the question as to why am I even that excited about this potential fight? And my answer to that is because fights that are close and competitive are entertaining, and that goes for all levels of boxing. One of the best fights that I have ever had the pleasure of watching is Jamie Moore against Matthew Macklin, and that was a fight that I believe was just for a British title. And by the way, if you're a boxing fan and you haven't watched Matthew Macklin against Jamie Moore, you need to go on YouTube and watch that fight, because that is an absolute classic. But the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes in boxing, records can be misleading, especially when you are trying to gauge how good a fight is potentially going to be. In fact, I would actually say that the higher the level of the fighters, the more likely you are to actually get a bit of a chess match in those fights rather than an all-out war. And one thing I can guarantee you is that this fight will not be a chess match. And when two fighters haven't fought before, there's always the question of how will the styles gel. But just trust me on this one, these two styles will definitely gel. And I know I've just spoke about the fact that Jarrell Big Baby Miller is without a win in his last 2 fights, but you really have to delve a little bit deeper and look at the context of those last 2 fights, and in doing so, that may well show you why I'm so excited for this one. Jarrell Big Baby Miller came through the pro ranks both talking big and delivering big, blasting his way through multiple average heavyweight fighters such as Jarrell Washington, Marius Wack, Joanne Duopas, Bogdan Dinu, and others before working his way up to a record of 23-0 with 1 draw. And that record helped land him the fight of his life with unbeaten at the time heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua. And if the press conference didn't whet the appetite, then the face-off certainly did. And despite most people feeling like Joshua was a favourite in this one against Miller, we really felt like we were going to see AJ tested. But unfortunately, it was Jarrell Big Baby Miller that was in fact tested, and the test results showed that he had popped for every fucking ped under the sun, meaning the fight was called off and Andy Ruiz Jr. stepped in as a late replacement. And we all know what happened there, don't we? Now, Jarrell Miller was given a 2-year ban, but it was actually the best part of 4 years before we even saw him back in a boxing ring. And due to the amount of performance enhancers that were found in Miller's system, the big question upon his return was, could he perform to the same sort of level that he was able to before? Could he maintain the work rate that, let's be honest, for a 300+ pound heavyweight was pretty remarkable? And upon his return, he did still look like he was very much capable, but we wouldn't get our real answers to that question until he really stepped up the level. And that step up came on the day of reckoning card when Big Baby Miller took on Daniel Dubois, and he really did have some good moments in that fight at times, seeming to bully the Brit around the ring before eventually succumbing to the superior athlete and being stopped by Dubois in the final round. However, that loss has actually aged pretty well, hasn't it, when you look look at what Daniel Dubois has gone on to do since then. And despite being hurt in that fight, Jarrell Big Baby Miller never touched the canvas, and he still did fire back with plenty of shots after taking big shots from Daniel Dubois. And not only that, Jarrell Big Baby Miller made it further in that fight than both Filip Hrgović and Anthony Joshua did. So Turki Al Sheikh and the guys at Riyadh Season had seen enough from Big Baby Miller to decide that they wanted to give him another chance. And in doing so, that's when we really found out our answers as to where Jarrell Big Baby Miller is at in 2024. Because on the first overseas Riyadh Season card that was in Los Angeles, Jarrell Big Baby Miller was booked to face former world champion Andy Ruiz Jr. And I have always been a huge fan of Andy Ruiz Jr. I think he's one of the most natural talents in the heavyweight division, and despite having a very long layoff and really having very little momentum since his defeat in the rematch to Anthony Joshua, I did favour Andy Ruiz Jr. to have enough to come through this one. But when Jarrell Big Baby Miller tipped the scales at over 2 stone lighter than he had weighed in for his previous fight against Daniel Dubois, you could say that the warning signs were there. Now, to be fair, Andy Ruiz Jr. did break his hand in that fight, and that's definitely going to hinder your performance. So to battle on through that and make it the distance is something that's really impressive. But for me, this was a career best performance for Jarrell Miller. So many of the question marks that we still had around him were answered. His cardio looked good in this fight, seemingly doing the 12 rounds pretty comfortably. He showed a great chin after being cracked with some of Andy Ruiz's best shots, and he was always firing back. And one thing that he did that I have never seen done to Andy Ruiz in the past is he was able to consistently back up and at times even bully the former heavyweight world champion. Not only that, but I personally feel like Jarrell Miller went some way to showing that even without the performance enhancers in his system, he was still able to keep up a solid work rate throughout the fight. Because this was actually only the second time in Jarrell Miller's career that he had been the 12 round distance. The first of which being against former Deontay Wilder opponent Joanne Duopus, and in that fight he landed around 261 punches, whereas in the Andy Ruiz fight he landed 183 punches. Now at a glance you might think, well, hold on, how does that prove that Jarrell Miller can still have the same sort of work rate when you've just read out the numbers and he landed 80 less punches against Andy Ruiz Jr. But what you've got to factor into that is Joanne Duopus has never really been better than a top 30, top 40 heavyweight, whereas Andy Ruiz Jr. was at one point in time definitely considered a top 5 or 4 heavyweight. And even this version of Andy Ruiz Jr. that's been out the ring for a long time and had a broken hand on the night was still able to offer so much more than a Joanne Duopus was. He was still landing heavy shots on Jarrell Big Baby Miller. He was still countering Jarrell Big Baby Miller, and he was still showing so much more resistance than Duopus was, who was really just tucking up and soaking up shots on the ropes. In a nutshell, the more you have an opponent in front of you that tries to win, I believe the less shots that you're actually likely to be able to land in that fight. Not only that, the better the opponent is, obviously the less shots you're going to be able to land in that fight. So for Jarrell Big Baby Miller to land 80 less shots on Andy Ruiz than he did on Joanne Duopus, who was literally just there to survive, if we're being honest, proved to me that Big Baby's cardio, even without the performance enhancers, is still pretty impressive. Now at the end of that bout, I really did feel like Miller deserved the win, but 2 of the 3 judges didn't agree with myself and a majority decision draw was given, which I suppose then puts Miller in a bit of a weird position, doesn't it? Because you've took 2 hard fights, you've showed up in both fights, but you haven't got a win in either fight, and therefore in boxing of the past that might then mean that you're casted to the side. But as we all know, Turki Al Sheikh loves fighters that come to fight, and therefore that for me cemented the fact that Jarrell Big Baby Miller was definitely going to get more opportunities, and the likelihood would be that they would be opportunities on Riyadh Season cards. And as for Derek Chisora, This man's literally fought everyone, hasn't he? If you don't look at the wins and you just look at the opponents fought, who honestly in this era of heavyweight boxing has a more stacked resume than Derek Chisora? He's fought Tyson Fury 3 times, Dillian Whyte twice, Joseph Parker twice, Kubrat Pulev twice, Helenius, Usyk, Vitaly Klitschko, David Haye, Carlos Takam, Ajit Kabayel, most recently fighting Joe Joyce. However, there is a problem, because with those 16 odd fights that I've just read out, he only officially has 3 wins out of those fights. And at this moment in time, he boasts a record of 35 wins with 13 losses. Now, let's be honest, right? That's the record of a journeyman, isn't it? But I cannot sit here and class Derek Chisora as a journeyman, because when I think of the definition, more or less, of a journeyman is brought in as the B-side opponent, and he is there usually to give prospects some rounds, to be able to expose some flaws, which then enable you to go back to the gym and enable your coach to know what you need to work on, but not expose those flaws so much that the prospect is going to get beat in that moment. And journeyman often just come to survive, and coming to survive is not something that Derek Chisora does. So I cannot, despite the record, class Derek Chisora as a journeyman. Now, I said he's only got 3 wins in those fights, but there's obviously a couple of very, very questionable decisions in those fights as well, like the fight against Robert Helenius, which I definitely felt he won. And even in fights with Dillian Whyte, Vitaly Klitschko, Usyk, Derek Chisora always turned up and gave a really good count of himself. And the reason that I feel that Derek Chisora has managed to stay relevant for so many years is not so much just what he does in the ring, but his personality outside of the ring. He's a divisive character, and he's someone that you never really know what you're gonna get next from. And despite being nowhere near as athletic as he was earlier on in his career, I would argue that Del Boy might even be a bit better now than he was early on in his career. Definitely some of his better wins have come later on in his career. And last time out, I honestly didn't think that he'd make it past Joe Joyce, but he formulated a really decent game plan in that one. He rode the storm at times and even managed to drop Joe Joyce in the 9th round of that fight. So I really do have to give Chisora immense credit for not only his longevity in the game, but also his adaptability to change his style and still maintain solid performances. So now we move on to the potential fight between himself and the brash-talking American Big Baby Miller. And I think this is a great fight for both men, and I also think it's very much a winnable fight for both men. Jarrell Miller's a sharper puncher than Joe Joyce, but they are both guys who like to keep hands on their opponents with a fairly high output for heavyweight standards. So, albeit very stylistically different, that Joe Joyce fight may well have prepared Chisora for this Jarrell Miller fight. Chisora has shown himself to possibly have the greater punching power than Big Baby Miller, as he can boast a knockdown on Joseph Parker and huge highlight reel KOs to the likes of Artur Spilka and Carlos Takam. Whereas you'd probably have to say that Jarrell Miller's most impressive knockouts to date are probably the likes of Marius Wack and a rapidly declining Lucas Brown. So as controversial as this may sound, despite the fact that Derek Chisora has 13 losses on his record and Jarrell Miller only has the 1 loss on his record, I would honestly say that Del Boy's record is more impressive than Big Baby Miller's. However, all of that being said, I personally would favour Big Baby Miller to win this fight. See, Miller's on somewhat of a redemption arc, and he's definitely on a mission to make up for both lost time and lost money, whereas Derek Chisora has actually flirted with retirement for quite a while now, and multiple times he has said that this fight in Manchester will be his last. And despite Del Boy pulling off a great win against Joe Joyce last time out, I would say that Jarrell Miller looked more impressive in his last fight against Andy Ruiz Jr. Miller showed the ability to work for the duration of the rounds and an improved level of IQ when it came to finishing close rounds strong, which can often swing the scorecards. I think if this fight is to happen, both men will land huge shots on each other, but I do believe that it will be Miller that lands the more telling punches on Derek Chisora, and I think with his recent weight loss and his improved boxing technique technique, Miller will have enough to be able to just move out of the way of some of the barrages that come back when Derek Chisora looks to counter his opponents after soaking up shots himself. Usually, those barrages are coming when Derek Chisora has his back to the ropes. So I do think that Miller has a little bit of improved footwork on what we've seen on the past, and he should be able to get in and out a little bit better than Derek Chisora is able to. Ultimately, I predict a fight that goes to duration, and in doing so, goes down as a heavyweight slugfest. And as much as I do make Miller a favourite in this one, I have learned over time to not write off Del Boy, and that is why I'm so excited for this fight, man. So if it does come to fruition, let me know in the comment section below who you guys would be picking in this fight. Thank you very much for making it round to the end of another video. If you're not already, please subscribe to the channel. I am banging out content here all the time now, and I'm working really, really hard to do so. So thank you very, very much, and thanks for all the love that I've been getting in the comment section recently. We're going to push it. We're going to get this channel right up there, and you lot are going to help me do it. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.